All right, guys. So we've taken a look at a few of the different selection tools. Let's take a look at these last couple here. So we have the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool, two actually of my favorite tools. So let's do the quick selection first. So the way this tool works is it's a brush. And by default, we have three options here for the brush. We have a new selection, we have an add to selection, and we have a subtract from selection, and it defaults to add to selection. We can sample all layers if we have more than one, and we can also auto enhance the selection edge, which I recommend doing for sure. And we can click here and we can increase or decrease the size of the brush to make it bigger or smaller. And you want to, when you're working with this tool, you want to understand that it goes quite fast. So having a big brush, you can increase it also by holding down the bracket key to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. On the right bracket, on the left bracket, it will go ahead and make it smaller. So you have to understand that this is going to go really quick. And so to have more control, you have a smaller brush. And to give yourself less control, you go with a bigger brush. On a high contrast image like this, I can have a pretty decent sized brush, and watch. I'm going to click, and with that single click, what it understood was that there was all that yellow there, and it read it, and it jumped and moved down the duck. And watch, I'm just going to move my mouse, I'm going to slightly hit the eye, and then it's going to just pick that eye up. I'm going to come to the bill, and it picks that bill up. And this is a great tool. And I can remember when Adobe first created this, I have had the ability to be a beta tester for Adobe more than once, and I recall them previewing this to a bunch of designers at once at a conference I was at, and the room just kind of went wild because this is something we had been asking for quite a while. So again, it's great. It's really easy to work with. So again, I'm going to do a single click. I'm going to start to move down through my figure, and it just jumps and it just grabs everything for us. And there we are. Now, it's really easy to accidentally go outside of your figure, and all of a sudden you can get everything else. So you have to be careful because this thing goes, again, super quick. So another way to do this is to make single clicks. And again, since your default is that you're adding to the selection, it makes your life a little bit easier to do that sometimes. And again, to prove it's a nice selection, I'm going to hit Command J and jump it to its own layer. And look at that. That's a pretty perfect selection right there that we have on our duck. So good job, quick select tool. Okay, next we have the magic wand tool. And this tool is really, really important. And again, we have the ability up here to change the way that we're looking at our selection, or we're adding to it, or taking away from it, things like that. And then we have a bunch of other stuff, and it's this other stuff that's really important. Yours is probably set up with a default that looks something like this. Point sample, tolerance, and then these may or may not be checked. Now, so we have an idea of how this works. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. So actually, before I zoom in, I think we'd all agree that that's a yellow duck with a red bill. But when I zoom into it a little bit more and I start to actually see the pixels, it's still a yellow duck, but these are all different shades of yellow. And a point sample essentially is going to let me click right here, and it is going to basically allow me to pick that specific colored dot right there, that one. And then what it's going to do is it's going to use its tolerance. And essentially tolerance in this is a range for sampling color, and I can go all the way down to 0, and which basically says that you have to have this one block of color. It's got to be that specific color, and that's the only thing I'm going to select. Or you can just bring it all the way up to 255 and just say, this one color I'm going to select, and probably everything else. So when we zoom out, watch, the whole box is selected. So neither of those work really well. Again, the default is 32, and while that works okay, it's not perfect either. because sometimes you get some really weird selections. And those selections happen for a couple reasons. One, this idea called contiguous. That's a fancy word for touching. We talked about that when we were talking about hard drives and how we wanted things that were similar to one another to touch one another. And that's just contiguous. We want these similar pixels to have to touch each other to actually grab them. That's not a bad thing to turn on. Sometimes you want it on, sometimes you want it off. When it's on and I click here, that's what I get. When it's off and I click right about there, I get a different selection. I get some of this stuff that had a similar kind of color pattern. But basically, let's get back into here and let's take a look at it. So the way that I can best describe it is this. I'm going to just change this to a block. So it's similar to this. So check it out. If I go ahead and I click on with my point sample, it makes a block like that. And it's going to select that one block. But I have the opportunity to pick a 3x3 average or a 5x5 average, and I can keep going up. So if I do a 5x5 average or a 3x3 average, it's going to select right here, and then it's going to step out 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. And then, so that plus sign that essentially gets created, that's going to fill in, and everything that falls inside of this little kind of box, this square kind of footage, if you would, right? All of those yellows that went ahead and lived there, they are essentially going to go ahead and blend together to make a new yellow. The way that when we look at this, it's just a yellow duck. It's that same kind of concept. All these things are next to each other and they blend together. And what we're going to do is we're going to be able to pick our colors based off of that, which is just so much more powerful. So when I go ahead and I do that, I can click and watch. I'll make a much larger selection simply by changing that sample size. Okay, so that was the difference between 3x3 and point sample. Let's bring up to 5x5 and check it out. And there we are. Okay, now let's go ahead and do that one more time, and we're going to increase our tolerance maybe by up to 50 or so. And check contiguous. And now let's click here. Whoa, look at that. That's pretty cool. It selected, I clicked here and it selected all this other stuff. Let's click the add to selection and click in here. And click in here. Here and here. And, you know, with a handful of clicks, I was really able to get this yellow duck. In fact, not just the yellow duck, but just the yellow of the duck selected. A couple spots gave me a little trouble, like right there. And when I try to get in and do it, I think I got just a little too close to the white. So what if I zoom in here? I come here, can I grab this? Well, right now, when I do that, there's too many steps that I can take, and I've put too much of a tolerance on. This is where I might point sample it and bring my tolerance lower and try it again. Yeah, little steps, but I get to where I need to get. At this point, I could also do something like grab a lasso tool and just grab this one little section. Because please remember, a selection is a selection is a selection. It doesn't matter what tool we're using, okay? It's the end result that matters. And it's that selection that we want and need. And that's pretty good selection. And I could go ahead and I could jump that to a new layer, and it's going to look super creepy. It's like because we've taken the duck's skin off, right? And that's not something we want to do to things at all, but it's something that can easily be done in Photoshop. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to come back down here to the wand, and I want to talk strategy with this tool. So the way this tool works, right, it's all about color, and essentially it recognizes that colors are sitting next to one another that are very similar, and it allows us to select things based on that. So when you are presented with something like this, like an object on a plain background, instead of worrying about the object, think about the background. So check it out. I'm going to click over here on the white. I have anti-alias and contiguous checked. I got tolerance size 17 and bump it up to 25. That's cool. 3x3 average. I could have it a point sample at this point. Won't matter. Watch. I'm going to click on the background and it highlights all the white. Cool. Okay. So I can say Command J and hey, check it out. I have a nice silhouette of that duck. Doesn't really help us. So let's try that one more time. Let's select the actual background. And now I'm going to say select and inverse. And basically what this does is this swaps what is in the background. See? Or excuse me, it swaps what was in the selection. So now the background is not selected, but guess what is? Our duck. So now I can just say Command J, jump that to a new layer, and there's our duck. So that's a really good thing that to do if you have that opportunity, is to select not what you want, but the opposite of what you want, and then simply invert that selection, and you'll get a nice high quality selection that way too. So in closing, with all these tools, I just have to say this again. I've said it before, I'll say it again. A selection is a selection is a selection. You can start with this tool. You can then add to it with this tool. You can go ahead and you could continue it with this tool. It doesn't matter. Photoshop doesn't care what tool you pick, just that you did pick a tool. Now, before I'm done with selections though, I'd like to talk about this idea of refining an edge. And again, I'm in Photoshop CC15. If you are in CS5 or CS6, it's still called refine edge. If you're in the newer Photoshops, the ones that came out like in the summer of 2016, then it won't be called refine edge. I want to say it's called refine mask, but it's the same thing. So you can grab it from the selection menu or this little button here that's available on pretty much all selection tools. And this gives us an option to go ahead and further select our object here, and we can view it in all different ways. So I'm going to view mine on black, for example, so it gives us a nice kind of contrast to what we had. So I'll get to the edge detection and the radius in another video, but right now we have this ability to adjust our edge. And right now we have, right here, we've got kind of a hard kind of edge happening. And part of it's because it's a low-res file, and that's just kind of the norm with those. But watch, I can increase this concept of smooth, and I can go ahead and I can make that less bumpy. Now, when I increase that though, you start to see this like weird halo of white around. So you have to be careful, because what it's going to do is it's going to basically step out a little bit. So you can't take big leaps, you got to take baby steps. So if I just increase this by just a couple little stops, it's going to work out for me. Feather is going to go ahead and it's going to soften the edge, which we're very well familiar with, right? The thing about feathering though is that usually you have to do it before the selection. So coming into refine edge allows us to do it after the fact, which is nice. Contrast is the opposite of smooth, and the fact that it's going to go ahead and it's going to make nice crisp edges. So they don't cancel each other out. They actually work well together when you use smooth and contrast. So I'll go ahead and I will sometimes bump that up. And then my favorite tool to use in most of these situations is this thing called shift edge. It basically allows me to expand or contract my selection. So I usually contract a little bit. So I go here into the negative numbers, and that just goes ahead and it just shaves a pixel or two off. So then that way, if I accidentally grab any of, like in this case, the white edge around the duck, that essentially makes it go away and makes it disappear. So And the bottom here, I have the ability to output, and this decontaminate colors really has to do with like color wrapping, maybe on like a green screen or something like that. That's something we talk about in graphics too. But if I click on output to, I can make it a selection, a mask, a layer. I can do all this stuff. So watch, I'll go ahead and say output to new layer and say okay, and then bam, the duck again is on its own new layer. Now, before again that I'm done with this, I'd like to point out that moving it to its own layer like this actually helps us build a future selection, because now the duck is all alone on the layer. There's no white background anymore like this one. Okay, so that means that the duck, it represents the bounds of all those pixels on that layer. And so if I roll over a thumbnail and I hold down the Option on a Mac key or Alt on a PC, nothing happens because I hit the wrong key. I'm sorry. If I hold down the Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, I get this little marquee next to my finger. And I'm going to click on that and watch. Ta-da! Selection. It selects everything on that layer. So if we worked hard and we've brought the duck and we've cut him up there and we've cut him out up there and we have a nice selection, I can command click on that duck all day long, and then I can come up with a nice selection, which allows me to come back here. I mean, and again, a selection is a selection is a selection. It doesn't matter how we got it, right? I can come back here and I could, further, duplicate this duck or move this duck or do other things to this duck if I want. So, one of the beauties is once you finally get it and you get it up on its own layer, you can very easily go ahead and reselect it whenever you need to. All right, we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about doing some fun stuff with this duck and moving into our first assignment. Thank you.